Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Srini here, and this is my channel. You can just look at into YouTube and go ahead and subscribe to it. So here we are going to look at a lot of free tutorials on Selenium, Java, API automation, robotics process automation. So today I'm very much happy to introduce you the API automation series. So we are going to start today with the introduction part, and do look at this video till the end so that you get a clear conceptual understanding of each and every elementary concepts, and it will be too exciting. So I'm very much excited as you all are. So let's get started. Yeah, so today we're going to look at the introduction of API, web services, and what are REST APIs. So this is something very much popular going on in the market. What are REST APIs? And you might have already got an idea about it. So we are going to look at the different conceptual part of each and every topic, that is API, web services, and REST APIs. So this will be agenda for today's session. We are going to look at what is an API, what are web services, what is the difference between API and web services, what is a REST API, and we will also look at what are the real-time examples of API and web services. So I'll explain you with an example what is the difference between the two, API and web services. So let's get started. So what is an API? So API stands for Application Programming Interface. So as the name suggests, right, it's like an interface. So you might have a question, what is the interface and where do we need to use an interface, right? So interface basically would be required when we have two systems which interact with each other. So it's like a medium of communication. Through an interface, it allows one particular component or system to interact with the other system, right? So this is nothing but a simple definition of an API, which any layman, any person can understand it without any fuss about it, right? So APIs basically allows one component or system to interact with the other component, right? So now we might have a question like, where do we use API in a real world situation, right? So I'm going to relate what this API is all about with a real-time example so that you will be able to understand it. So now we're using Selenium, right? Similarly, people who are like Java developers only may not be aware of Selenium. They might be aware of jar, right? So jar is nothing but an archive of all the different classes which are put into one file, right? And that particular jar file, we can use it in a project. We can just add it to our build path, right? Now, how this API works, we need to first understand with an example. So let me just show you through Paint software. What exactly is this API all about, right? So imagine that we have a software, right? We have a software here which is developed by someone, right? And let's say there are certain methods which are there within it. So there are methods which are there within it. Okay. I'm just going to call a particular name to that. Let's say M1 and let's say M2, right? So we have a particular jar file which is having a collection of classes. So let's just create one more package outside it. So this is like a package, and this is the entire jar file, what we are talking about, right? This is the entire jar file. Now, if a particular, let's say a client wants to use some of the services of this particular jar file, right? So what they would be doing, they would simply be accessing it. So they would simply be accessing it, right? And this is nothing but going to be some other particular system which is going to access my jar file and try to make use of the methods which are a part of some class file, right? Let's say this is a part of some class, let's say utilities, right? So there are some useful utilities, let's consider as an example, which someone has created, right? And they have made it available in a jar. And it could be the case that the jar file could be, most of the times it will be open source. Sometimes a company would ask for a particular license cost to purchase, or for someone to basically make use of a particular utilities which someone has created. Sometimes it could be open source. So we are using Selenium, right, in our particular framework. Likewise, for any particular Java functionality, we have such a collection of classes. Similarly, if you look at data science or machine learning for that matter, right, we have a lot of rich libraries which are available like Pandas, SciPy. So what they do, they have these libraries which are nothing but jar files, right? So they have classes within those jar files, and within those classes we have got useful methods. So we need not write a method from the scratch. We just have to utilize the methods which have been already created by someone. So right, so API allows one particular system. So let's say this is my system one, right? This is my system one, and I'm going to have one more system. This is my system two. So API allows the different systems to interact with each other, right? And this is actually happening within my entire system. So let's say I am the user, right? So I am the user who's basically nothing but the system two. If I am the system two user, right? So I have this jar locally available in my project. I have already imported this jar available in my project. But whatever piece of code I've written within my functionality, I want to make usage of some of the utility methods which have been provided by this utilities class. So what I would be doing, I would be creating the object of this class, and I will be basically using, right? So I'll be creating an object of this class, right? And I'll just simply use the method which is m1. So with this m1, I would be basically be able to get some usage of it, and it will maybe returning some value. So I'll store it in some variable, let's say int var, right? And this will be used for my further part of my logic, which is written in this system to whatever code I'm writing here, right? So how this is all happening? This is all happening through the usage of API, because we have a jar which is available locally in our project, and we are making the usage of its functionalities just with its methods, and we are able to do our whatever coding part is there, right? So this is all about communication between different systems, and it can be the case that these two systems are interacting with some formats, like it could be XML, it could also be the case that they might be interacting with each other through the JSON format, right? So I'm just mentioning it out here. It could be HTML, it could be JSON, right? But this is all happening locally. It is not happening over any internet or any network. It's all happening locally within your project. You are able to interact with the jar and utilize its features, right? This is what we call as an API. So API allows one particular system to interact with another system over an interface, which may not always be over the internet. So here is the thing. So we are going to understand what is a web service as a next topic, but API for now, you just have to understand that it need not always be over any internet network. It can also be over the network, that is over internet, and it would be able to make usage of HTTP protocol, that is hypertext transfer protocol. That particular protocol basically allows systems to transfer the information over a network, right? So as we widely know, for any website we are using HTTP and HTTPS, right? So HTTP stands for hypertext transfer protocol, which allows the systems to interact, the client and server to interact over a network, right? And that network, we would be basically having a client. So I'll be just showing another diagram. Let me save this one for your usage. So I'll just say sys1 API. Now let me create a new one. And in this one, I'm going to talk about what exactly happens, right? So just imagine you have these two systems. So I'm just going to explain web service now that you've understood API, which is nothing but locally within a machine, we are trying to interact with some other class. So here we are having one particular system called as client, right? And we are having one more system, which is called as server. Basically, it's kind of a dynamic server, we could say, because we would be requiring a lot of information over the network, and it will be able to dynamically fetch it for us and transfer it back, right? So what happens now here? Let's try to understand, right? So client basically sends some request to the server, right? So client sends a request to the server, and what will server do? Server basically will understand the request. It will decode it as to what that request is actually asking, and it will give back the information which the client has asked, right, as a form of response. So this is request being sent from client to server, and we are having a response sent back from your server to client, right? So when they interact with each other, let's call it as A, and let's call this as server, right? So when they interact with each other, how would they able to be interacting with each other? They can interact over the web or nothing but over the network, right? So they are interacting over the network here, right? They're interacting over web here, and they are able to do so with the help of HTTP protocol. So this is where your HTTP protocol comes into picture, where over the network, these two systems are able to interact with each other. Again, it's like an interfacing communication, right? Where these two systems are getting interfaced and they're exchanging information, right? So let's say the client has made a request, right? And it could be in the form of normal parameters like a form parameter. Let's just say we have a form here, right? Let's just say we have a form here and we are entering, let's say, username. It's someone like Srini, right? And we are entering some other information like whatever we require, like the address or some other portion, etc. So those are information whatever the client is giving. Maybe that we are trying to sign up for the first time. Let's say we're trying to sign up an account for the first time at any particular application for that matter, right? So what happens? These all information basically the user is entering in a HTML format, right? We are getting a HTML page. We are not getting any kind of a non-understandable format for any normal person, non-programmer person, right? We're getting it in a proper HTML page, right? So let's say here that they are entering all the information in a HTML page, right? But client, we don't know how it is programmed, in which particular language it is programmed, right? So the client may not understand the HTML language because it may be designed in some other language. It could be PHP, it could be Python, it could be Ruby, it could be Java. So what would happen in that matter, that particular case, right? We have to make the client's information understood by the server, and it make by giving it a response back to the client. So that is all achievable with the help of certain ways of interacting between client and server. So we are having different ways of sending the information or decoding the information. So what happens is that user enters this information, right? But there is this interface in between the APIs, right? We have this interface in between the APIs. We have this APIs in between, which we are basically now using web services, right? So we are going to use over HTTP protocol, right? So these APIs allows the systems to interface with each other with the usage of API. And in this API, what I'm going to do is I will be having the form of communication, right? So the communication, once the user has entered into HTML format, what would happen actually is that this will be basically translated into certain understandable information by the server, right? So this can be done either in XML or it could be done in JSON. So XML is nothing but extensive markup language. So this basically you might be having a little bit idea about it. So XML is just like a kind of a tag and a value format. So there will be tags. Let me show you how that it will look like, just to give you a glimpse of it. Right. So let me just mention here. Let's say tag name and value, and then we'll be having this tag name closed here. So this is how a XML file would have a collection of different XML tags, right? This is how a XML file will look like. Now we have similarly another concept of JavaScript object notation, that is a JSON file. So a JSON file would slightly have a different behavior or the look and feel of it. So how the JSON file will look like, right? So let's have a quick look at it. So a .json file, this is the extension of the JSON file. It will be a .json file, and it will basically be like this. It will be basically enclosed in this curly braces, and we would have an attribute. Let's say attribute 1, or let's call it as a name, right? It's like a name, and let's say Srini. And we can have multiple attributes. Let's say city. Let's say Delhi. That's it. So when you have just a couple of fields, you will just end without having any comma later on at the last line, right? So this basically will become like your key, and this becomes your value. So this collection of such things becomes your JSON file. Now you can also have a JSON array and JSON. This particular object is attribute or object is called as a JSON object. So one JSON object is having a JSON value, right? So we are going to have an in-depth look at what is JSON and all about that in one of my other session. But just understand that it's like a JSON file which will have a collection of such things, right? And we can also have a JSON array. So JSON array basically will be like a collection of values. So let's say values is one attribute, and it will be like within such kind of a rectangular brace. And within that, again, we will have another objects within it. So let's say obj1. So we can have obj1. It will have a value, value 1. Similarly, obj2, right, having a value, value 2. So this is how within a JSON file you can have a collection of JSON objects as well as you can have JSON array objects as well. So in this way, the whatever information has been given by the client, right, has been given to this server in an understandable format. It could be XML or JSON. So this has been basically the server or whoever service you're trying to utilize. So they basically would ask you to send the information, and they will take care of translating that through the usage of API into the appropriate format which they understand. Likewise, whenever they get this data, so they have understood, okay, this particular address, so what do I want to do with it, right? So they will ask you a question, what do I want to do with it? So you have to also ensure when you are sending a request to the server, you are also giving what kind of action you want to do. So we are going to look at what all actions is possible over the network. So that we call it as CRUD operations. So CRUD operations are nothing but what all ways or methods are there with which a client can do different operations with respect to the server, right? So let's look at what are the different CRUD operations and let's understand the meaning of it, right? So C stands for create. If the client wants to create some data at server, so that is the meaning of C. C stands for create. R, as the name suggests, it stands for read. U stands for update, right? And D stands for delete. If client is insisting on deleting some information at the server, then it means we are asking it to be deleted. So create, read, update, and delete. Now create, basically we can associate with some action wherein the new data has been created and the client would want the data to be stored at the server, right? So we are going to associate this with a particular method used by HTTP protocol. So we are using HTTP protocol here. So it's going to be using post method here. To get any information or to read the information from the server and give it back to the client, we are going to use get protocol. That is a get method. If we want to update an existing information of some particular resource at the server, we are going to use put method. And if you want to delete some existing resource at the server, we are going to use delete method. So these are the different CRUD operations which the HTTP protocol would be using whenever it is having any interaction between a client and a server, right? Now what happens? So basically this HTML data got translated into XML or JSON format, right? What we have shown here, whichever server is able to understand. It could be XML or JSON, any of the two. Server would interpret what is actually being intended to do. So if the client was saying, you basically just get the information, that is read the information. So it will ask what information you want. So it might tell, okay, it needs the information, let's say, of user details of so and so, of let's say company 1, right? So of company 1, it's basically is asking some information. It's asking some information from of a particular employee, right? So what it will do is it will ask for some information. So server will say, okay, fine, you are requesting for some information to be retrieved. So it's basically going to give it back to the client. So it will again give a response. It will again give a response. So this particular response, what we're talking about, right? This will be given by the server, and this particular response is going to be again in the form of XML or JSON, right? It's again going to be in the form of a XML or JSON format, but this will have the information what is required. So let's say employee 1 is Srini, right? And time since employee is present in a company. So likewise, so whatever information was requested by the client will be returned back to your client by the server, right? So this is the way of communication which happens between a client and a server. It could happen through any of the HTTP methods, right? So it could be either getting the information, it could be either storing some information at the server side, right? We've already looked at that. So let's go back to our slide. So we have looked at what is an API. So an API is nothing but an interface between multiple systems to interact with each other, but it is not necessarily that it has to be over a network. It can just be locally with the help of a jar file or any other particular software if you're using. It's something that within the system it is there. You need not use the network or the internet for that matter. But web services, on the other hand, they have the information exchanged over some API or interface between a client and a server or between multiple systems over a network. It need not be always two systems here. It could be across many systems over the web, but it is across the web. That is the meaning of web services. We have also looked at the difference between API and web. API is something it need not use web, but web services always the interaction happens over a network. Network is a must in case of web services, right? Now, what is a REST API? So REST API is nothing but a representational state transfer kind of architectural style. So it is having some set of rules and sort of ways of doing uh, data transfer, a state transfer. When I say a data transfer here is nothing but whatever resource we are requesting from the server, it basically doesn't transfer the exact object. It transfers the object state. That is, what is its attribute, what is its value. So we are retrieving the entire information over a network. So yes, REST API is nothing but a kind of a web service. You can say a REST API is a kind of a web service. And we are going to look at the REST API in detail in this API automation series for sure. So now let's understand what is the real-time examples of API. We have already seen that within the Selenium, right? When we're using Selenium. So let's me go back to Java. So this is my project, right? So if you see here, let's take an example of Selenium tutorial session and let's look at this reference libraries. So if you look at this reference libraries, there are so many jar files which are used in this particular project. So when I use any of its features, right, I'm internally invoking the open source jar files, maybe for Apache POI, or it could be Cucumber, right? Cucumber or Apache POI, or it could be JDBC jar to basically establish a database connection. So how are these jar files basically giving us that interfacing part? These jar files are basically able to interact with our software, with our JVM, right? Let's take example of Selenium. So Selenium standalone server standalone jar file, what does it do? It is having a collection of classes. Let me expand it. If you see, there are these many number of packages, right? So let's say example of common base. So there are so many different collection of different classes which are available in this package, and each other class is playing a role here. Whenever we're using any Selenium functionality, what happens is that these class files, they have a way of interacting with the web browser, right? So for web browser interface, we are having a Chrome driver, right? So we use Chrome driver for that. Similarly, if we want to use any particular methods within Selenium, we are using the methods which are present within the class. If we expand this, you can see there are these many different methods which are there, right? So with the Chrome driver class, we are able to interact with the browser. So that is nothing but like an API. Within the jar file, it has methods. Those methods act like an interface between your requester, nothing but your script. Script is nothing but going to be your requester here. It is having some lines of code, and in those lines of code, I have used certain objects of my class, right? So those objects of a certain class, let's say we are creating an object of Chrome driver, right? So when you create an object of Chrome driver, we will be able to interact with its method, and those methods allow us to interact with the web browser and give us back the output. Similarly, we have other examples that in TestNG, we have Apache POI. So how are we able to use the functionality of TestNG annotations or the Apache POI to read or write from Excel, right? That is all possible because of its methods which act like an interface between your script and your web application, right? So here we are doing everything within locally. We are not accessing the network to basically fetch the resource, right? We are all doing it with the usage of the jar file, which is available to this project locally, right? But let's take an example. Where is that web service is used? This was the example of an API. Where is that we are using web services? So for that, let me explain you with another diagram. So this was an example of a web service, right? But let me take another example, which will give you a real life application example. So let's say I have a particular application. Let's say, for example, irctc.com, right? Right? IRCTC is a kind of a ticket booking tool, right? For booking any train tickets, etc. We use it. Now let's take example of another application. Let's say there is a mobile app which is available for a user, right? A mobile app. Let's say app name is book tickets. I'm just giving a simple example. It could be any name, any app name, but understand the concept here, right? So we have either a mobile app like a book tickets, or let's say for that matter, we are also having some other apps like yatra.com, or let's say a mobile app Yatra or Make My Trip, right? We have so many apps like that, or Trivago. So understand what these all different apps they do. That is the important part to understand. It could be any mobile app for that matter, but what are these websites doing? So I have an IRCTC one example I've taken. Let me take another such example. Let's say this is Indigo Airlines, domestic airlines within India, Indigo Airlines. I have IRCTC for booking train tickets, right? So these two are my main resources, right? So they are the independent owners of basically ensuring that we book a Indigo air ticket, or IRCTC allows a train ticket to be booked. But let's say they are not offering much discounts, and a user would want certain discount to be applied when they are booking tickets online. So what would they prefer? They would prefer some discount so that the price is reduced, right? So they use mobile apps which offer some good discounts. Now what these mobile apps they do, right? We have to understand the architecture behind that. So these mobile apps are nothing but they are able to utilize, or you know they will be able to interact with these different systems, and they will allow the user to book the ticket still with giving some discounts rather than going to the individual website. So how is it they are able to achieve that, right? How is that some third party tool, some third party application is able to access the actual website which is offering tickets on purchase, right? So that they are able to do over web services. So that is the concept of web services here. So they are able to do because of API here, right? And these APIs are nothing but they are called as web services because they are interacting over network. Since interaction is happening over network. So that is why we are calling such APIs as web services, right? So what is happening here is that Indigo is saying, fine, if you want to use my services to book, for allowing your customers to book tickets, for that you will have to purchase my services. I cannot simply expose my code which is there within my database, right? Because that is very risky. It would be a security concern for me. So a third party application would say it's fine. You just give us some source of communication or some intermediate in between, so that through that we will be able to interact with you. So that is where API comes into picture. So this API or web services we're talking about is like a interfacing between your client and a server. So this is nothing but the API. So this is your client, right? Whoever is going to request the information, and this is going to be your server, which is going to provide you the information. And the information is exchanged over a network. Information is exchanged over a network, and that network would be a HTTP protocol. So that network, what is happening here is going to be a HTTP protocol. So it could be any version of your HTTP protocol. Let's take example of HTTP 1.0. So Over this network HTTP protocol, the client basically requests for some information. So client basically requests for some information, and service or the Indigo Airlines or IRCTC for that matter, they give it back to the third party app. But can they directly allow such thing to happen? No, right? Then anyone can directly request for something to be done, and then they will be able to access it directly, and that too free of cost, which is not always the case, right? So you need some kind of authentication here, or the client has to purchase the services of your server, or whoever services you want to purchase. Let's say, for example, Amazon Web Services or Indigo Airlines or IRCTC. So if any third-party application wants to access its services, they have to pay cost, right? So with that cost, they will be getting some access token. Right? So here is the concept which I want to explain, called as access token or authentication key. So only the authentic users should be able to access the services, right? Otherwise, anyone can directly go ahead and access or get the information, which without paying any money. It could be some sensitive information. So they would want the Indigo Airlines or the IRCTC or any airlines for that matter would want only the authentic users to request information, and only they will get the response back. If they have not given any proper authentication key or access token in their request when they're sending the information, so that request will be declined if proper key is not set to identify that it's an authentic user, right? So this is where the authentication part comes into picture, where third-party applications do give information along with what they want. So whenever they're booking any airlines or any booking for that matter, they along with the payload, right? So payload means along with what information they are having. So we might be having information over like JSON or a XML format being sent to Indigo. Whatever the user is given the information, like what date to what date they need to book the flight, right? So whatever information they are having here, let's say from date to date, destination, source, so where they want to book the flight from, etc. So these all information are actually passed over either XML or JSON to your server, right? This is basically given to your server, and it is given in the form of XML or JSON, right? So that server can understand if it's an authentic user. First of all, with the usage of this access token, they will have a session key as well. So there will be also a session which will be going on between. So with the help of cookies, there will be a session which will be established between whatever booking is happening between the client with respect to the server, right? So they are going to interpret what information is required, and they will give the response back to the third party client, right? And that response is going to be again in the form of XML and JSON. And when it is displayed back to the user, so when it is displayed back to the user, it will be in the form of HTML again. So when you look at makemytrip.com, right? Let me show you how they operate. Makemytrip.com. So they are having a lot of options here: flights, hotels, holidays, trains, buses, etc. So if you click on, let's say, flight, for example, it will ask you for the information of your from date, to date, etc. Right? So from Delhi to Bangalore, let's say departure on 5th of August, right? So if I click on search, so it will load the results for the user, right? So these are different results which are returned for the user back with, let's say, the here Indigo is one of the airlines. How is that Make My Trip is able to get the information of Indigo Airlines with the flight number, with the exact availability of the flight, with the availability of tickets? It's all because of the APIs. So because of the APIs, they have exposed or given to their legitimate user, who is the authentic user. Make My Trip is having some user ID or token key. So since they're able to identify that, okay, Make My Trip is my authentic user, and he has given a proper request with a authentic token key, So they will be able to reply back with correct information with as per the database. So it will be always in sync, and that is why user can purchase the tickets from such kind of third-party tools without any need of a worry, because they are going to get actual tickets rather than worrying about whether it's really available or not. So this is how your web services plays a role. It allows the clients to interact with the web server or the distant source from where you want to get the information over the network. That is why such APIs are called web services, because it's always happening over a network and there is some authentication going to happen. It will be using HTTP protocol, right? And the request should be sent in the form of XML or JSON. So that's all about the introduction part of web services and the real-time examples of API and web services. So in the next particular session, we are going to look at some key terminologies which are used in API, like what is the endpoint URL, what is a resource, right? What is Postman tool? What are other such tools available in the market to do API automation testing? And we will be focusing our other tutorial sessions on REST API. So that will be all about this particular session. I hope you like this session and it was useful for you. Please do share with your friends and do subscribe to my channel if you haven't done yet. Thank you so much.